What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Katie Black Show. I'm excited. Today I have with me.
Dave Tomar.
What's up, Dave? How you doing?
Doing good. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming on. I was just telling Dave before I hit record that this is kind of really exciting for me because it's 2 years in the making.
Yeah,
So,
that's right.
but anyways, so first of all, I always ask people, where were you born slash where did you grow up?
I come from Northeast Philly. I grew up near the Oxford Circle area for anybody who is local to that region. And I'd like to say it ain't what it once was, or maybe it was always that way. And I have idyllic memories of it. But yeah, I spent my first bunch of years in Northeast Philly.
And so, like, in a nutshell, was that, like, what was that like?
Back then, which was in here, this is, you have to, I guess, date yourself early, but back in the early 80s, it was very neighborhoody, and I live in the burbs now, and you don't always know your neighbors and everything, but we lived in row homes, and so everybody was connected, and it felt very old world. My aunt and uncle lived next door, and my cousin's bedroom used to look across this 3 foot alleyway to my sister's bedroom. So we used to chat with our cousin through the windows at night when we weren't supposed to be up. So it was very, makes me feel like I came from like the Lower East Side in the 20s or something, because it had that sort of close knit neighborhood feel that you don't really get a whole lot anymore.
Yeah. Sounds kind of like a movie a little bit, huh?
A little bit.
Very cool. So before, I always say I went before I get into it, but I'm always into it. But so I connected with you because you're a writer. And my friend Sarah gave me your connection, and I'm a writer too. So before we get into your successes, at like what point were you realize you were a writer, or was there a moment where someone told you were really good?
It became evident to me that it was my only marketable talent at a pretty young age. 9, 10 years old, and you start to sort of formulate independent thoughts that you think people need to hear, whether you're right or wrong. That was sort of the impulse, and
Hmm.
I think I started probably writing poetry and fiction back when I was 9, 10 years old. But by the time I was in junior high, so we're talking like 12, 13 years old, I was pretty determined that there was really no other sensible path for me. So I guess either you could call it lucky or unlucky that I knew what I was going to do with my life my whole life.
Yeah, I say that's a slam dunk because I've kind of.
It can put you in a box, though.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting. Well, real quick, some background. So I was a seventh grade English teacher a couple years ago, and wow, it is really heartbreaking to see that kids just don't know how to write. Not that you have to have like this creative, amazing bubble, but just like basic like sentence structure. That was really eye-opening for me. But they can get on their phone and like do it all.
Yeah, well, it's and we'll get into this a little bit when we talk about sort of how I really dug into making a living writing. But one of the observations that you make is that people, far too many people lack the very basic skills to just express themselves through writing. And arguably, there's technology that is now making it easy to get by without those skills. I think there are certain risks in not being able to comprehend what you're reading and know whether you can trust it or not, especially in this era of AI. But for a good portion of my career as a writer, I just have been struck by how many people really get through every stage of schooling without ever being given the basic tools.
Interesting. And also, before we go like down that path, have did you find in school that you were, obviously good at English writing, social studies, but maybe not great in like math, chemistry, or that doesn't?
Um, I was adequate in them. I did fine. I did fine in school all around, and but as I think a lot of us are wired this way, you tend to invest a lot more energy and passion into something you actually like doing. So this will become very ironic when we get into the deeper discussion. But I was not a very dedicated student. Not that I found it challenging. I found myself detached from it at a pretty young age, just not particularly. I guess that's the other thing when you know you're going to write for a living. Anything that sort of diverges from that goal seems like a bit of a waste of time. And
Hmm.
I'm not saying I feel that way now, but certainly as a kid when I was going through school, that was a feeling I often had. So, bare minimum effort. That's what math and science would get, enough to get by, and I did all right. But it didn't have my heart, so it didn't have my effort.
Fair. Well, I was horrible at math, which trickled into chemistry and all that stuff. But so that's why I asked. But yeah, so how I don't really know how to get in it without just saying it. So you wrote a piece called "The Shadow Scholar," and 2010. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And how, like in a nutshell, what was that about for those that might not know?
Okay, so as I said, I took it'll become ironic when I tell you that I wasn't a very dedicated student because in the decade immediately following college graduation, which was 2002.
Uh-huh.
2002, I graduated from Rutgers. Wanted to write, always knew I wanted to write for a living, and it's I think you and any writer knows can be a real struggle to find somebody to pay for your work.
Absolutely.
However, what I learned at Rutgers, which it is relevant, has a huge fraternity system. There were many people willing to pay for my work, and they were all students, and they wanted me to help them cheat. And I was very willing to do this because it gave me an opportunity to make a living writing. And I wasn't particularly enamored of what I got from my investment in my university experience. So I started to feel, this whole thing's kind of a big racket and I'm going to get my piece of it. So
Uh-huh.
for a decade, I helped students cheat for a living. And it wasn't necessarily because it's what I wanted to be doing. And the longer I did it, the more I sought like ways to make a living that weren't dishonest. And more importantly, that contributed very little positive to the world. However I felt about the schooling system after 10 years of doing this, I felt it wasn't necessarily the best use of my abilities. So the article that I wrote in 2010, The Shadow Scholar, was an expose about student cheating and what really goes on behind closed doors and how big of a problem it is. And to your point about junior high kids not knowing how to write, the reasons that student cheating happens, and we can get into this, a lot of theories based on the sort of enormous amount of we could call it anecdotal, but at the based on the thousands of papers I wrote for students, it is almost statistically founded to say that it's really endemic that students struggle with the English language in English-speaking schools. So this article was a reaction to the fact that people would ask me for those 10 years, what do you do for a living? And I would say, very frankly, without any compunction, I help students shoot for a living. And, occasionally I'd get the judgmental reaction, and occasionally I'd get somebody that have a lot of opinions on that, and I would gamely discuss, not defensively, but objectively. I'd like to think, but more often than not, people were fascinated. They'd say, "Where the hell were you when I was in school?" And then they'd have all kinds of questions about how well this goes on. And the more I talk to people about it, the more I realize people don't realize that the level of cheating, the way it's being done, and how hard it has been to detect for teachers. So that was sort of the beginning of that.
And I, of course, have like thousands of questions. So is it essentially like you just struck gold with a few kids within the fraternity and then your name kind of spread?
That is literally what happened. Yeah. So, I had no money,
Mhm.
and hanging out with a friend one day, and she was like, my buddy over there in the fraternity, once, he's got a history paper he can't write. Actually, you know where it really started? Rutgers has this terrible program. Used to, again, I graduated centuries ago, but Rutgers had this program called expository writing, and
Mm-hmm.
it was like this sort of pass fail, show your rate of improvement, but we're not actually going to teach you how to write
Mm-hmm.
course. And I had been in AP English, I placed out of it. So the average student that was in it was somebody that was still sort of working through. They had decided you needed help with your writing, and they had a program that was incredibly unhelpful. And so that became sort of a common theme with students couldn't really figure out the arbitrary system to achieve pass fail. And I think my first client was somebody who was looking for help with that course, and I worked with them all the way through it. And then you have a history paper for a fraternity brother, and then I'm starting to field calls. My number is out there, and they're like, I hear you do this. And I got a system down at that point. By the time I was like a junior in college, I was actually making enough money to, eat ramen noodles, and I was happy, And so I had a system, and they'd call, and I'd say it costs this much, and I'll have it done here, and you got to pay me this up front, and blah blah blah. Don't guarantee you a grade, just get it done to your liking. If you hand it in, it's on you, man. That sort of thing. One day before a class, I was taking one such call, and a girl overheard me. She came up to me. She said, "My boyfriend works for an online company." This is 2001, so that was pretty novel to me. I had no idea that there were custom bespoke essay mills, and so she gave me an email, and that opened me up into a world of constantly paying work. So by the time I graduated, I started to do that with a good amount of my time.
And obviously, it sounds like you wrote just about everything you can imagine. That means
Well,
that.
to your point, I did all right in math and science, but what I would always say is, as long as it doesn't require hard math, I can do it.
Uh huh.
That was my pitch line. Like, whatever it's about, as long as I don't have to do math, I can do it for
I'm
you.
game.
Yeah.
When you write, I guess regardless of what it is, do you kind of just like go somewhere? You know what I mean? Like a meditation, like I don't want to say no,
Uh,
but
it's just process oriented now. As a writer, I'll make a confession. I don't read an enormous amount of books, and one of the reasons is because I spend all day long just gorging on information, on whatever subject. And I don't do this for a living anymore, but I still am sort of a jack of all trades, working in many different industries, and so you have to become a 24-hour expert, and so I do that. Often on many, many subjects. Some subjects long enough and well enough that I actually do know them pretty well at this point. Other subjects, you're going to take a crash course, and you're going to learn what you can learn. And a lot of times the job is to make something complex easily understandable. So it's not my job to write about a subject with the depth of a professor. It's more my job to sort of create that accessibility. So that's the level of expertise I'll try to establish on a subject if I'm doing it overnight.
yeah, so fascinating. Well, is there like, I mean, I'm sure there's obviously, and I know that well, first of all, before, as the article itself, did someone like encourage you to pitch that, or did the application come to you?
A dear friend of mine who is a wonderful sports writer, and I'll even, since I have his book next to me, I'm going to plug my good friend
Yeah,
Howard Magdahl, who just wrote this excellent book on
very
Caitlin Clark.
cool.
Howard and I go way back and have written together and collaborated. And he said, my agent would really like to hear about this. And so this was many years ago. I pitched it to his agent, and she took me on board and suggested, since I never really had I lived in the shadows. I had no social media presence. I was helping students cheat for a living. It's not the kind of thing you write a blog about. And so, it was not the most obvious pitch to a publisher. And so she suggested very wisely, let's write an article and place it somewhere where people will actually give a shit.
Mm-hmm.
She connected me with the Chronicle for Higher Education. They were very intrigued, also concerned and skeptical, and so I showed them quite a bit of my, the guts of the operation over here, and so they were convinced, and we went with the story. It became the most read and commented on story in their history, which apparently they were anticipating that this would be a big deal, and I was not totally
Mm-hmm.
prepared for that. As I said, I worked in the shadows for a long time, and so it, 600 comments, some of them being like, obviously this goes on, others being like, this guy's a liar, others being like, let's find out where this guy lives, and so it
Right.
was a lot. And then there was media that came after it. So it was on when Diane Sawyer still hosted the
Nightline.
ABC. Yes, and so I actually interviewed with David Muir, who was at the point he was second in command, which was a really trippy experience
Oh,
because
I'm sure.
he sits down with me in person, and he kind of got my hippie vibe, and he was like, he goes. He goes, don't worry, man. This is going to be totally chill, right? And then we sit down, and the cameras are rolling, and he's like, "So you helped people cheat, is that right?" And I'm like, "Holy shit! What
Like,
just happened?"
whoa, yeah.
Yeah, that's so yeah. It created a bit of a firestorm that I was not anticipating because like I said, I had been very candid always when people would ask what I did, and but my agent had suggested getting in front of the right people who would really care, which is educators and professors and administrators and whatever. That definitely triggered something. So
Right.
yeah.
Wow. Real quick, what was Diane Sawyer like?
I never met Diane Sawyer. She introduced the segment, and then it was just I just did in a very quiet room with like three other people. I asked for my face to be blocked out at the time. I was writing under a pseudonym, which I think I should mention. The original story was under the name Ed Dante, and one of the reasons was, I had no expectation of exactly where this was going to go, and as much as I didn't want to continue to help students cheat for a living, I didn't know if I might still have to, I didn't know that it was going to lead to a book deal and sort of open a lot of doors for me.
Yeah.
You have no way of knowing these things. So I was like, let's do this. Let's do this through sort of a side door. And so I wrote with a pseudonym when we published the article, and I appeared under that pseudonym with David Muir, and so my face is blocked out. I've got one of those creepy voice modulators on,
Right.
but I'm going to tell you this: they can only do so much with shadowing, and so I have an unusual silhouette where I had friends from college that would be like, "Yo, dude, did I just see you in Diane Sawyer?" I'd be like, "Nah, I don't know what you're talking about."
Oh, wow. Well,
Yeah.
so like, what's the one like nugget that you took away from like obviously all these kids wanting you to help them? Is the nugget the education system in the country? Is the nugget
Yeah.
is that
Yeah.
it?
Yes, it is because no, you're right on. Because what I find so fascinating is how much of this conversation is about the ethics and the moralizing of it, and based on the work that I did, obviously, I might be a peculiar messenger for saying dismiss the ethics. But I'm not saying it because I think it's right or it's wrong. I'm saying it's because you're missing the forest for the trees. What it's really about is desperation. What it's really about is students who are underprepared. It's
Mhm.
those seventh graders that you see that don't know how to write, and by the time they get to the college level and these skills haven't set in, many of them not only don't know how to write, they lack the wherewithal to even sort of understand what they're being asked to do, how to execute it. In my books, I have shared, and in the article I shared, and this caught a lot of people's attention. Oh, he's faking it, he's lying. I shared, without incriminating individuals, the contents of emails, not to mock anybody, but to display to you that graduate level students literally lack the tools to write a coherent email to me to ask me to help them cheat. So where does that put them when it comes to writing a 15-page essay about something that requires depth of research, way in over their heads? So the big nugget, the big takeaway, and it's the thing that I learned over the years is, ethics aside, there's a lot of different reasons that people cheat, and some of them are because they're rich and lazy and whatever. That doesn't also mean they don't know how to write, though. And I do have a certain amount of empathy for the student body at large, for being in over its head, paying an extraordinary amount of money for a product of increasingly questionable worth. And then when you get into that situation where it's also very transactional, the risk of failing a single class and not getting your money's worth for 200 grand, that's a pragmatic decision for some of these students to then cheat, because they don't have the tools to succeed in this class otherwise. And so, of course, none of this is to excuse it. And none of this is to say it's ethically okay. It's to say, put the ethics aside for a second, because whether you think it's right or wrong, the motives that drive students to cheat are still going to be there.
Yeah, it's like you have returning customers for a reason.
Yes, that, and it was a big part of the business was students that would come back to you again and again and again. And one of the reasons is because the gap between what they are capable of doing and what they have just paid to turn in is so wide that there's really no way around getting caught if you don't stick with the product. Of course, the problem for educators is ChatGPT. I mean, it's a funny thing because this market has changed. I know I'm leaping topics, but this market has changed because a lot of what I'm describing is what was true just a few years ago. But just a few years ago, I would say to people, and I said it, it's so. These are not plugs, but only to sort of. So this was my first book, which was sort of a memoir that followed up The Shadow Scholar. My second book is a complete guide to contract cheating, which was this field of bespoke, custom written essays. That field, the minute I wrote this thing that was a complete guide, like ChatGPT came into existence. So this became deeply incomplete really quickly. However, the one thing I said, because I told a bit of the history of contract cheating, it's been going on for a long time, in one form or another. There used to be advertisements in the 40s in the back of like a Harvard presser, for getting help with your essays or going through the essay files like you'd see in the fraternity movies, like in Animal House or PCU, whatever. Gradually, technology would replace the opportunities that students had, not the impulse to cheat. So when I was writing custom essays, it was the next thing after Google searches for essays. And now you're just playing whack-a-mole, and the students are like one step ahead in the methods they're using. And now it's ChatGPT. The business model that I used to live on is being dashed to pieces now. All of these companies that for 20 years, you had schools worrying about how do we put them out of business, and they're being put out of business by the next thing you have to worry about.
Like, how do you feel about ChatGPT?
Oh, well, I got a lot of feelings about it. I mean, it can be a useful tool, as like a sort of junior assistant for organizing things and whatever. I find the writing is, look, it's poor, repetitive, like
robotic,
fluffy, factory robotic writing, and I will worry about ChatGPT taking my job the minute it can make me laugh, because until you can cue into what makes human beings laugh, I don't think you know how to write for real.
Yes,
yeah,
I can.
yeah. I mean, not just laughing, whatever, human emotions. For me, that's the one I channel into when I write. Other people channel into, sadness and love and these things. But until ChatGPT can sort of replicate that ability to resonate, now, if I was just out of school and looking for work and doing what I did for a living, I would be pretty worried about it because it can easily replace what I used to do. Which is not to say that its writing is better or worse than what I was doing at the time. It's more like, what was the goal and the standard for a student to find something adequate to hand into a professor with 300 students? So the amount that they care, ChatGPT is just as effective and much faster and free. So, I do think it will be it is quickly becoming increasingly obvious when you're using that. So
Agree.
that's, we're in a weird sort of bubble right now. I'm sure the technology will get better, but right now it's sort of ebbing in its capability, and so I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know what to think of it either, but recently I was like, "Oh, I can't. I'm having issues like framing this like little paragraph or two sentences or whatever." I'm like, "Let me ask it to reword it." And then I'm like, "Damn it, no." Like I caught myself. I'm like, "No." Like I'm gonna like figure, you know what I mean? I've had kind of
Yeah.
moments like that where I'm like,
Yes, absolutely. Well,
"No."
I've started off bits of work, sort of run of mill type of copy for a client, and I might jump to ChatGPT and be like, organize this for me, and then I'll take a look at it and be like, I'm literally going to rewrite every word of this, but thanks for the framework, whatever.
Mhm. Right.
And because time is money, and if it can be a force multiplier, I think that's good. Um, you can't trust it for anything. Its willingness to fabricate realities. It's an interesting thing about ChatGPT. It's very eager to please its human user, and so I've recently read some pretty horrible stories about its ability to really take people with psychological difficulties down weird paths.
Oh no.
But for me, the weird path was that last year I was like just toying with it, and I said, who's going to win? Who's going to win the NCAA tournament? I want to fill out a perfect bracket, and it was like, well, we can't predict the future, so we can't help you with that. And I was like, well, tell me based on some statistical prob. No, we can't help you with that. And I said, thanks for mutton. And it was like, I don't understand. I said, well, you don't watch Seinfeld? And it said, oh, of course, that's the episode where George became a mutton salesman. Our apologies. And I was like, no, you just made up an episode of Seinfeld that literally doesn't exist. And I find that, for one, very alarming. So,
Fascinating. Well,
yes.
real quick,
They're called AI hallucinations.
interesting. So I don't want to. I just want to ask this one last thing. So I heard like I had Bill Maher in the background. I used to like be really into it, and now I'm just kind of like I'll go in and out of the room. I did hear him and Dr. Phil claim that it is left leaning. Any thoughts on that? Like, is that just?
I think
I mean,
I I
that's
think
just
as a
their
rule,
opinion.
yeah, well, I think as a rule of thumb, conservatives think everything is left leaning, and that there's a sort of look at the left boogeyman. As I once pointed somebody to Snopes over some conservative conspiracy theory, and they said, and this will obviously betray my own biases, but the person said, well, doesn't Snopes have a liberal bias? And I was like, well, yeah, sure, truth generally does, and that's sort of that's where I break out on that.
I'm
So,
gonna start. I'm gonna
if you
start
ask
using
me,
that.
yeah, well, this is the thing is, yeah, I think that truth has a liberal bias, and I'm not saying that we're all honest, but I think that not to go too far down that path. I think we're living in a really weird time where one side gets to fabricate its own reality, and the other side is left grappling with how to keep this reality alive and make it better. And I find AI is very unhelpful right now because
Mm-hmm.
it is blurring those lines. I'm not a naysayer. It's just Pandora's box being open, and we're seeing what happens in an era where people will believe the thing that suits their narrative.
And I just, yeah, well, real quick, it's definitely troublesome. I actually tried a cookie recipe from ChatGPT, and it was the worst cookie I've ever made. Just
Well,
to,
they're scraping Google for information, and so it's not something you can't find on your own. But as you would know, if you scrape Google for the same information, you'll find a lot of shit real fast.
there.
You know, but I've produced an enormous amount of content over the years, both through the my less honest line of work, and then as a freelancer for the succeeding 15 years or whatever, and I was recently reading about how there is a large class action suit rising against these content generation apps for copyright infringement based on all of the data that they've been scraping off of the internet using to train their models and then spit it back out at you. And I'm starting to think I may be entitled to compensation. So I think I've been helping to train AI for 20 years,
Yeah.
and so there's that. We all have.
Yeah, fascinating.
Yeah.
Well, so many things I want to ask, but I towards the end of the interview, so there's like 9 minutes, 8 minutes left, whatever. I get like nostalgic. So growing up, did you have a favorite band or a favorite musician that you loved?
Oh, well. Oh, you want to talk about going down a rabbit hole? I'm going to move my camera here for a second. Here's what we're
Hmm.
going to do so you know how hard this question is for me to answer. All right, so those are records.
Hmm. Whoa!
Those are records. Hold on. Those are records. And so are those over on that
Oh
side.
my God.
I'm a deadhead though.
Okay, okay.
Look, here's my if I can get it right. There's my Dead and my Dylan over there under the window.
Oh, and a little
Um,
peace sign rug.
when I write though, I listen to an enormous amount of jazz. I just find that it is, I love Bob Dylan, but he never shuts the fuck up, and it's hard to think of your own words when he's. So I tend to
Hmm.
listen to John Coltrane and Dave Brubeck, a lot of piano players, Oscar Peterson, and those kinds of guys. Herbie Hancock. Piano playing helps me type.
I love that. Yeah, it's interesting you say that too, because just in the last year, I'm like, I write better when there's music on.
I listen to music all day long, but when I write, it is either jazz or something in a language that I don't know, so that it can't throw me. So like a lot of Brazilian and African and Latin stuff tends
Wow.
to make its way to my turntable.
Now, are you a millennial, meaning babies born between 1981 and 96, or are you Gen?
I am I'm the youngest of the Gen Xers. Yeah, and I tend to identify that way too. I was born in February of 1980,
Oh, so
and
right on the
I
cusp.
have I have far too deep a memory of new wave videos on MTV to call myself a millennial. I think I am, and I have an older sister, 2 years older than me, so it tended to push me towards the Gen X side of identity.
Right.
More grunge than emo, as it were.
I love that. Well,
Yeah.
another random question that I asked towards the end is I'm obsessed with Unsolved Mysteries with Robert Stack from back in the
Mm,
day. And I loved the category of the unexplained
yes.
and was wondering, have you ever seen a ghost or like something really weird happen that you can share?
Mm. Oh man.
Pressure, but
I can't say that I've ever. So I am a believer for what it's worth, but I don't think I've ever seen or I wish to experience something unexplainable, but I don't think it's happened yet. Yeah, I was walking at 2 in the morning with my daughter in Fire. She couldn't sleep, and we were in Fire Island a couple weeks ago, and I took her for a walk down to the beach, and because I'm a nighttime guy, and I said, "All right, you can't sleep, don't stress. Let's go for a walk."
mhm.
And we had a beautiful, peaceful walk, and then we came back, and we get back to the house. It was a friend's house, and we heard an animal snarling in the bushes, and so we ran into the house, and it is unexplained. I'm guessing a coyote, but not supernatural. It's just I don't know
Just
what it was.
odd.
Yeah,
Well,
yeah,
I love those kind of stories.
yeah. So we had a nice peaceful walk, and then at the end we were like, let's go in before we're somebody's late night snack.
Yeah, that's a good little story. Okay, and another, just while obviously I have you here, if I'm having issues like pitching a story, um, any suggestions? I mean, I know the whole thing of like look at the audience of the publication and all of
Mm.
that. I've restructured the piece, I've rewritten it a couple times. Any advice, or do you think it's just about having the right land in the right person's hands, or?
Well, I will. Yeah, I mean that's part of it. I mean, for one thing, I would say that it's really. I mean, this is the oldest advice in the book is don't get discouraged because you gotta. I mean, sometimes you just gotta pivot. to pitch somewhere else. I mean, like that's that's the thing, is that there's a ton of rejection in the business, and
Mhm.
that's just kind of part of the life. That's how I found myself writing papers for students. Was it's not wasn't necessarily voluntarily, but it was pitches get turned down, things that you're really excited about. I still have ideas that I think are really cool, and they've been turned down, and I'm like, all right, let me think about pivoting, and where do I really want to put this, and when am I going to put the time into it. But I guess there is the important part where you stop and you ask yourself, what is the need for this? Is it something I just feel like I need to say, or is it something that somebody needs to hear? Because if you can compel somebody that it's something they need to hear, it's probably a better pitch than it's something I need to say. So, because I think that was when I wrote my story about helping students cheat. I didn't necessarily feel this great need to get this weight off my chest. I've been telling people for years. It wasn't like I'm confessing my secret. It was like, hey, I'm starting to realize y'all don't know about this. Like maybe you need to. And that was the thing that landed the most successful pitch of my career. So I think that's and that came about pretty organically, but it was probably a pivot from me being like, here's what I want to say, you know. So
Wow. Okay. Yeah, I'm gonna marinate. Any thought? I mean, obviously we have 2 minutes left, but do you think colleges are really going out of style, like they say, or you think that's just jargon? Or
uh, I think it's a bubble. I don't think it's going out of style. I think it's gotten too big, and like the entire industry has become too expensive, too transactional, too diffuse with options, some of which are of ill repute. The Trump administration, again, not to get political, but we were turning the corner against nonprofits, especially under Obama, where he really passed a lot of laws around accreditation and funding that made it much harder for these scam schools to exist. But now we're living in the era of the scammer in chief, who himself ran one of these scam colleges and stole money from people in exchange for meaningless degrees. And so I think that only further sort of risks that this bubble is going to like pop. And it doesn't mean that colleges are going out of style, but the ones on the bottom, they're going to go. And that's why small schools, and some of them pretty decent, but maybe financially insolvent, are going to suffer. Yeah. Plus, and where I think we're running out of time here, but I'll just say, if I can get it in, as a student, you just have to do the math and say, is it worth it based on the path I want to take? And I think that that's a harder calculation now. It used to be much more obvious.
yeah, but then also too, just like for my era, it's like I don't know life without school.
Yeah. Well, I
Oh,
think that's a big thing, is you're only told about the one pathway, and it's true. Like, I mean, when you get into the job field, and people want to see degrees, so it's not untrue, but maybe that system is